This month, Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, drops on Netflix. Now, while I didn't find the first part of Rebel Moon to be particularly good, I do find Zack Snyder to be an interesting director. And whether his movies are good, great, or awful, there's always something interesting. They're always worth talking about. So with that in mind, I wanted to go through some of his movies that I haven't talked about all that much on my channel and give them proper reviews. We're kicking that off today with Sucker Punch. Not one of his better movies. So to be perfectly clear, as we go into this, I don't feel it's very difficult to discuss this film without going into spoilers. So by the very nature of that, I will be essentially spoiling the plot of this film. There's not a ton of actual plot points when it comes to the narrative, the story, and to dive into why this movie doesn't really work for me, you just have to talk about it. So if you haven't seen the film, I suppose go watch it, or if you don't worry about it being spoiled, you can just watch this. But if you're going to make a bad movie, at least make it interesting. And I would say that this is a very interesting and memorable bad movie. Whether you're just simply talking about the fact that the imagery is just so vibrant, the imagery to this film is so distinct that immediately you remember this strange juxtaposition of these girls in women in schoolgirl outfits with katanas and machine guns battling mechs, samurais, World War I soldiers, dragons. It's imagery that sticks in your mind. But also, it's a movie that is a dream inside of a dream. It's a fantasy inside of a dream, which also makes for such a kind of bizarro framing mechanism for a story that you remember it. It stands out. Does it work? I don't think that this movie works at all. I don't think, on a story level, it is unbelievably frustrating and cyclical in a way that steals its momentum, but you remember it. It's at least interesting while not being good. Now, in an interview from last fall where Zack Snyder was talking about all of his different films and breaking down his iconic films, he said that this was the first of his movies to have like a radical restructuring to be more commercial. I'm kind of curious what that means as to how the movie was changed, because I don't know that there's a way that you could restructure this story and make it work. Where I don't like watching the movie, I can imagine how that potentially they said, like, you got to speed up the first 30 minutes and make it 10 minutes. And so then it just montages through the first something. I can imagine that. But as for when it actually gets into what's going on in the story, I don't know what restructure would fix this basic premise. But I'm very curious what he means by that, because he said this is the director's cut that's still out there. This is the one that people still need to see. Will it save the movie? Am I just missing something that's like he had this masterpiece in his mind of a dream within a dream with all this fantastical imagery and a psychological, maybe, but the movie that we got doesn't work. Where it is on its main plot level, it's about a girl who has been wrongly locked into a psych ward by her stepfather, who has paid off an attendant to give her a lobotomy in 5 days. And so that's set up. There's then a time jump, and we're about to see her have the lobotomy. And then the actual primary run of the film is a fantasy visualization of the previous week's actions in her head, where every time they do something, we get a metaphor for the fantasy that's in her head. So it's a dream within a dream. We're not even playing out the fantasy in her head, because in that it's like, well, she goes to dance for people, and then it cuts to the fantasy in the fantasy. And because of that, nothing has any meaning or weight to it. Nothing feels like you're invested in it because there's two different layers of artificiality to it. Every action sequence, when we get all the wild imagery of the schoolgirl outfits, the katanas, the mechs, the samurais, the dragons, the World War I mask wearers, all that stuff, whenever we get all of that, that's a dream within a dream. And so it lacks any meaning. And there's not even like a plot in that area besides pick up these artifacts. So they're just standalone sequences of the girls going into a different place to grab a thing with different cool imagery. This one has the samurai. This one is World War I in the trenches. This one has the dragon. Different imagery, but always kind of it's a simple go and grab the thing. We do that 4 times. So it gets cyclical and very repetitious in this 90-minute middle section of the film. And then even in the middle of it, the middle layer of first layer of our fantasy, we're seeing a story that every time it's about to do the action where people are trying to sneak and grab something, there could be tension to that. We're trying to sneak and grab a thing while she's dancing. Then we cut to our fantasy mech warriors and schoolgirl outfits. So it robs itself of any tension. It robs itself of the actual playing out of story by just having everything being a layer within a layer of something. You're not able to care about the characters. You don't feel the danger. You don't care what happens because it's not real. And you're not even playing it fully out. You just keep cutting away from things. And so then as you move into the final realizations of the plot where you realize our story isn't actually about the character that we think it's about this other person escaping, and our lead character is meant to be the sacrifice, which should be this powerful moment. This should have been the character arc of our hero learns that she was never meant to get out of here. She was meant to save everyone else. That should be really cool. But when you keep cutting from things and we're in multiple layers, you don't build that arc. It doesn't work. There's not a journey there. It's just like the person we've been waiting to live can't do that. So she gets captured. But in the real world, what this means is you get to the end of the film and it's supposed to be like she sacrificed herself to save the day and she gets lobotomized. And so you end on this very kind of gross note where it's trying to be like she sacrificed herself, she's victorious, someone escaped, but we didn't see the person actually escape. We didn't connect with the person that actually escapes. There's a little bit of, she sets some things in motion to where people get caught, but we don't see the actual abusers being arrested. We don't see the abusers being thrown in jail, murdered, anything. We don't see any of the real world things. And then we see a fantasy of a person in a realm that's in her head, but visualizing something real that has the fantasy person from a different layer of the story helping her escape. But it's all fantasy. It's not real. So you're watching it and it doesn't mean anything. It's empty. And so it's interesting because it's such a swing and a miss, such bold imagery of what if we did a psychological thriller, but also it has mechs with miniguns in it. Let's go for it. But it doesn't work at all on a story or a character level. All that said, you got a movie that it's the coolest looking bad movie I've ever seen, to what I said earlier. It is jam-packed with potent imagery. It is jam-packed with stuff where you go, that looks awesome. And in fact, at the beginning of it in the first 15 minutes, there's 2 different basically musical montages. It starts off with a musical montage, and then it follows up with the second one shortly afterwards, where you kind of play through the plot of the film, where they take these 80s songs and do modern covers of them. As when I started my rewatch, it was right as my 5-year-old was falling asleep, and the song that plays at the beginning is Sweet Dreams by the Euphorics, and it's also a song that's in Trolls Band Together. So the little 5-year-old who's sleeping like perks up and starts singing along with this cover of the song of Sweet Dreams, which was like, that's kind of it. I wasn't expecting that to play out when we pushed play on this movie, and then she goes back to sleep as soon as the song is over with. But you're watching it, and the opening plays like a music video. It would be like the coolest music video ever about this, girl that's trying to get revenge on her stepfather who killed her mother as this song. And then it does another one with Where's My Mind by the Pixies shortly afterwards. Visually stunning. Some of the best Zack Snyder imagery. But when you're concocting a script just to be able to put very cool images on the screen, if you sacrifice character and story on the altar of imagery, you better have cool imagery, and this movie does. Perhaps this is the ultimate example of style over substance. It looks really, really cool. It has all sorts of insane scenarios of do you want to see a samurai with a Gatling gun for an arm or minigun for an arm? I do. I want to see that. Now I've seen it. Do I want to see mechs battling World War I prop planes? I do. I want to see that. Now I've seen it. I wish that there was a story that worked where you could follow the arc of a character, the journey, and have it pay off in a satisfying, meaningful manner. And it simply doesn't with this movie. So it's interesting, but it is not good. Overall, I think I'd only go like a C-. It's not even a movie that's particularly easy to watch, despite the cool imagery, but it gets so cyclical in the beginning that you just, the first action sequence, you're like, oh, that was cool. The second one, you're like, oh man, we're bringing everybody in. This is neat. And then you're like, wait a minute, is that what the next hour of this movie is just this meaningless, cool visuals? And it's exhausting. That's what this movie is, unfortunately. So, awesome visuals, one of Snyder's worst films, and an example of why he's probably best working with other people's scripts, not his own original ideas. And I think we now have a number of movies that have proven this. Let me know your thoughts on Sucker Punch down below. Check on some of my other thoughts on other Zack Snyder projects right over there. I should have a few more of these videos on Dawn of the Dead and 300 as well. Probably Watchmen before the new movie comes out. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.